Welcome to SEVA VentRounds. Today is May 28th, 2024. And the topic is, did anything fail? Waveform reading. All right. Okay, this thing is not working. Wait a second. This one was compared to this one. So that tells me that this one is cycled by the patient. So to me, this is definitely an IMV type of breath. Rob?
Could you elaborate on that? Because we see coloration changes in the pressure waveform and the flow waveform.
Yeah.
So that the red line in the pressure waveform would indicate patient activity, but there's also a red line in the flow waveform. But the two breaths that you indicated as spontaneous, the red line extends through the cycle event, right?
Right.
Now this is a GE CareScape, isn't it?
Correct. I mean, that's what I can read. Just the based on waveforms, yes, that's a GE. And the truth is under bent buster, so they can confirm or deny, but this is a GE ventilator, and that's why I think that you see the difference in coloration, right? So and the difference, even without the coloration, the length of the breath between this, if we took that out, this is a spontaneous or a patient cycled breath compared to this one in which time was a factor.
Sure.
Yeah, so Ben Busters proves the motion. This is a GE CareScape R860. So just looking at this waveform, you have IMV and you have a breath here, and then you have one that didn't trigger, and we can talk about that in a second. But then you have all of this, and then again a spontaneous breath. What does this look like in terms of type 1, type 2, type 3, or type 4? Type 1 is kind of odd because you would expect there to be some spontaneous breaths in between these ones, unless if the rate was so high. It doesn't seem to be that the distance between this one and this one is so long that makes it different. So it's a little bit odd. Type 2, I would expect, I mean, there's patient activity, so I would expect these ones to have disappeared if that was the case. Type 3 would be a possibility in which you would say, well, the minute ventilation has not achieved its goal. But I don't believe that this ventilator has that type of targeting. So type 3 is out. And type 4 would mean that it's because of the effort, and that should have then cycled these breaths because this patient is exhaling actively during inspiration. So in reality, it doesn't really fit that classification, Rob. It creates a challenge in my mind when I see this. Why is this so different in that terms? This should be type, it doesn't fit a type 1 because of these 3 breaths in salva. It doesn't fit any of the 2, 3s, or 4s, and it's not type 5 based on what we know now. So the alternative here would be that this cycles based on volume, and you achieve volume at the volume that it needed, and it cycles before it can, but that doesn't make any sense either. So I'm puzzled by the type of. What are you thinking here, Roberto?
I'm thinking I got to read the manual and figure it out, because everything you said is correct. There was once upon a time an infant ventilator that was in pressure control, would cycle if the tidal volume reached a preset threshold, but that's extinct now. I don't think any ventilator does that anymore.
So this is odd. It doesn't fit the pattern, and it doesn't. So it could be something else that occurs here, and it's not cycling the way it should be, and it's going to another backup mechanism. I don't know.
It's a challenge. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, so I don't have an answer for you, Ben Busters, but this I know that you guys had put 1, 2, and 3, but I hope that the explanation of why we don't think this is 2, 3, 4 makes any explains this. Next, any comments from the audience? I'm looking. I think that majority is in agreement with this. So let's look at the load for a second. And what do you think is the load during inspiration for this patient? Yeah, Mohammed, I think that you're right. I mean, this looks to be all patient activity. So a lot of PMOS during inspiration. It triggers, it continues to breathe. What about during exhalation? A fair amount of PMOS. It's hard to tell here. Well, the initial gut feeling is that there is active exhalation. That it's going from yeah. The second one is that there may be an obstruction, so that the patient is having an inability to generate. So it's blowing and the time constant is elevated. So I would say PMOS plus minus obstruction. My suspicion, and the same, it also made me think that there could be some obstruction when I was looking at the flow being limited. So you see how it doesn't go higher than something. So that made me think that perhaps there could be some obstruction. So the flow being flat and not being able to go sinusoidal makes me think that there could be an obstruction, similar to when you have a trach and you cannot go through this. And during exhalation, there's potentially activity. Ben Busters asks, I think this is a type 1. Due to G doesn't have other types of IMV. It's likely. However, the question here is why does it look like this, Ben Busters? I think that if I had to guess on one, I would say type 1, but we need to read the manual without a doubt. All right, let's go to the patient ventilator discordance, and this has a lot of stuff to look at. So let's start with the trigger. What do you guys think about the trigger? Normal, early, late, false, or failed? So it seems for breath 1, 2, I'm gonna make this one a breath here, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There you go. So it said except 3, Filippo normal, and there's one that looks like a failed trigger. So I would say that in general it's normal, but then there is this breath number 3 that, I mean, you cannot fail. You cannot fail to see this event, which is the pressure drops from around 8 of PEEP all the way to sub-0, so probably -1. And so it goes 9 centimeters of water of negative. So why would this be here? So what are the potential causes for this missed trigger here, or failed trigger, sorry? And is this a failed trigger? Roberto, what are you thinking? I see you shaking your head in disbelief.
It's very odd. The patient's dropping the pressure in the circuit, but the ventilator isn't responding with flow. So it's almost as if there's somebody stepped on the circuit, you know.
Yeah.
But that's not true either, because doesn't this ventilator have a proximal airway sensor?
No. Well, unless
No,
you put it.
it's back in the vent.
I cannot say that with 100%. I don't think so.
You know, there are some configurations where you can have a flow sensor at the airway opening on this vent. There's no way to know if that's what we're seeing here.
But if you look at the flow, it essentially went zip, right? Zero.
Yeah, no
So
flow.
that's what I would expect. I think somebody put it there. This looks like somebody put a inspiratory hold, like they were doing a POC on this patient. So that's how it looks to me. And I don't know if Vent Busters has the look for it, because otherwise, then this is messed up. This would change you to think that this is an IMV type 1, but then this breath over here makes no sense under the universe, because it would be 3 types of breath. So I would say that my suspicion is that somebody pressed an expiratory hold button here, and that's why it looks like a failed trigger, because otherwise it should, I mean, or stepped on it, but I would say that somebody pressed the button.
Most
And so
likely.
Vent Busters, which is the provider, says there is no expiratory hold.
On this
I
vent,
love it.
no expiratory hold?
No expiratory hold. So they're saying that this is no expiratory hold, that nobody pressed the button, that they are not sabotaging you. Mohammed is saying, then you stepped on it.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, let's think about it. If this was the vent, can be because it fell on the refractory period, Rob. It wouldn't, right?
It's too long. The
It's too
refractory
long.
period should be, a few milliseconds after the cycle event. The
Would be
cycle
around
event,
here.
yeah, it should have been way in that period. That doesn't look right as an explanation.
So this one is another. Well, the sensor malfunction. I mean, all the other breaths are being delivered. This one doesn't make any sense. So it looks like a POC was activated, and I don't understand why. It shouldn't be the refractory period. It's far away in between. All the other breaths seem to be triggered appropriately. So yeah, you're right. Why is there any? So why there was no change in color, right? So the ventilator didn't sense that and kept the valve closed. But then if it was a type 1, you would expect the breath to become a pressure support breath, not to close against it. So again, I think that this is a back to the manual and trying to understand this. But if this is happening regularly, I think some of the RTs on the line are putting, well, you need to change the sensor calibration and see what's going on. But this is important, and I would applaud Vent Busters, because when you get these images, this is what helps us understand what the ventilator does in real time. And without them, we cannot tell. Sometimes the manuals don't even go in that depth. All right, during inspiration, is there assistance, over assistance, or under assistance? Yeah, I think you guys are right. I would say assistance. I mean, there's high work of breathing. There's no question about it. The patient is breathing hard in and out. But you can see that at least on this POC, it was 9. So that would be the normal range for a POC by itself. So there's work of breathing, but it's being assisted. Rob?
I agree.
All righty. And then finally, for cycle, what do you guys think? I love this. This is a common source of confusion. Is it early or late? So remember, everything is in reference to the patient. So the ventilator cycled late in regards to the patient. So later in reference to the patient. Cycled all the way over here. The patient effort ended here. So this is a late cycle that you're seeing. It's common source of confusion. So just remember, when you are trying to figure this out, stop for a second, set the ventilator acted earlier or later in reference to the patients, and in this case is later in reference to the patient. And finally, in expiration, we talked a little bit about it. That's likely expiratory work. Excellent job, team. So, Rob, would you like to summarize what did we see here? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that it's fairly clear to me that this is pressure control, even though if your eyes go to the flow signal and it looks like a constant flow every breath, it could fool you into thinking that it's pressure control. I mean, volume control with a set inspiratory flow. I think that's just an artifact of the fact that the patient is making large inspiratory efforts. The two other pieces of evidence that this is pressure control is that you have, despite different tidal volumes, you have virtually the same peak inspiratory pressure for 2, 4, and 5, plus you have the what appears to be pressure control breaths in 1 and 6. So any way you look at it, it's pressure control plus, as I mentioned, as you pointed out, there is this expiratory flow during the set inspiratory time that can only happen, to my knowledge, with an active exhalation valve in a pressure control mode. So despite the fact that this is a very chaotic pressure and flow waveform, there are enough clues that we can make the distinction. I think it's important to note that there are pretty clearly two kinds of breaths: spontaneous 1 and 6, and mandatory is the rest. So that's some kind of IMV. Why the pattern looks this way, it needs to be discerned, and I'm going to figure this out because it's intriguing. And then what happened with the missed breath in 3? Like you said, the most obvious explanation is an expiratory hold. If the machine doesn't allow that, and nobody was stepping on the tubing, I guess you can't roll out a machine malfunction. I don't know. I don't know what other explanation there could be.
And without a doubt, some of these ventilators we found that they apply when we think about volume control, the old style that they used to call assist control and assist. Some of the ventilators out there apply a very strict rule for the controlled ones, in which if you try to breathe in between the mandatory breaths, you will you won't get any support. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And so it's an interesting thing. I do read on the comments from VentBusters that they thought that this was sensors or valves, but they checked the system. So this makes me think that this is a algorithm that they may have, and obviously I think that many of these ventilators are not checked for all the variability that exists out there with our patients, right? And the amount of effort that they can generate. So you get these patterns that will interact with the ventilator algorithm and generate these aberrancies that, as we see on the screen today. So more to come. I'll post an answer after we read the manual below on the YouTube channel to help you out understand this.
Can VentBusters tell us what the name of the mode was?
VentBusters, do you know what the mode was?
GE name? That would help a lot in trying to figure it out.
And Dr. Yeah, go ahead, Mohammed. You can ask the question, please.
Hey, thank you. So, can you hear me?
Yes, Mohammed, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. And just like a quick question, if you look at the pressure scalars in the first and the last breath,
yeah.
So it has a little bit like increase in the pressure at the end of the breath. Do you think like there's a little bit of like late cycling in here as well, or why we have this changes? Like if you see in the second, fourth, and fifth breath, we can see the raise in pressure with like the late cycle that corresponding with the decrease in the flow, but we in the first and the sixth breath, why that increase in pressure at the end of it? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So the first peak that you see over here, this peak over here, and we had a session in which we talked about this in the past. this is mostly an artifact, but it's a manifestation. And actually, we did an argument, counter argument between Rob and I, in which we were like, this is not late cycle, this is late cycle. And we ended up saying, well, it's a form of late cycle. It's just essentially the ventilator does not react at the speed that it should to the change from inspiration to exhalation. And Magdi Younes had a very nice paper talking about this. So you can try to shorten the E-sense or actually increase the E-sense as much as you want. So the sensitivity to cycling to try to improve that, but it takes a lot to achieve it. And I can post also that answer on their in Twitter in the next days.
Thank you.
Breath number 2, number 4, and number 5, actually, this is common for us to see. So in this, if you can imagine a line that is not moving as much as my pulse, this is what you're seeing is also the activity, the expiratory activity of the patient against the system. So the patient was trying to pressurize. The patient is breathing out actively with the expiratory muscles. Air is coming out, and so the pressure moves up. And so you see, and perhaps probably is around here, all this second step that you see is all the activity, expiratory activity of the patient. So at the beginning, inspiratory effort and then expiratory effort. So I would suspect that this is how the pressure would look. All of this is inspiration. All of this, the high pressure is expiration.
Thank you.
No problem.
One thing to note is when you see a pattern like that,
Rob, go ahead.
some ventilators will subtract that area underneath 0 from the inspiratory volume, and they'll tell you that that was the inspired tidal volume, and it's not. Now, the GE vent doesn't do that. The GE vent calculates it right, but we have written a paper on some ventilators that do it wrong.
Absolutely. All right. Here's the CRC for the artist. Here's the CME for the CCF caregivers. Please take a picture or record. And here's where all the resources and prior episodes are. Really appreciate your input. So Rob, now we know this is by level. We'll take a look at the manual and get back to you all. Excellent. Great discussion. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Great.